Hi everyone. Last time we had a discussion about Petrarchan sonnet, its structure and organization. Today we are going to talk about English sonnet and we will try to um, understand the difference between the organization and structure of Petrarchan sonnet and English sonnet. Now when we talk about the difference between the two, please remember that not all English sonnets were different and in variation of the scheme that was followed by Petrarch. This was in just an addition. So if you are referring to Petrarchan sonnet, there may be several English poets who will be following his idea and his theme and his form of sonnet. But when we talk about English sonnet, we actually mean the changes and the variations that were introduced by different English poets into the sonnet form. So let's try to understand why were these changes introduced by the English poets in the first place. We know that poetic adventurism is always at play on the part of a poet, and he or she may try changes based on their skills and their understanding of different imaginative subject matters. But one practical reason that can be put forward as a justification for the changes was the pronunciation pattern of English language that was undergoing transformations at that time. We should remember that in the early modern period, English was not really a standardized language. So there were variations in spellings and of course in pronunciation, and that would at times prevent poets to create and then to render their poetic creations more rhythmical and poetic because of certain restrictions in spellings and then of course pronunciation. So one good change that the English poets introduced was that instead of following the Petrarchan form of the octave and the sestet, they followed 3 quatrains and a couplet. So the Petrarchan sonnet was actually 8 plus 6. So they would form 14 lines. And here mostly in English sonnets we see 3 quatrains and then a couplet. So this was one change in the form of Petrarchan sonnet by the English poets. When you talk about the rhyme scheme, it was also different because of the change in the form, and it was having more space and flexibility for the poets, and this is one justification again for those unstable pronunciation patterns as I have already referred to above. So when you try to understand this rhyme scheme, please remember that it was actually Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, who tried this rhyme scheme. Like he was the one who used quatrains and then a couplet, and it was later on perfected by Shakespeare. So most of the times in history books we associate this rhyme scheme with Shakespearean sonnet. So I hope you remember Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey. We had a discussion about him in our very first lecture about sonnet, and there we had said that he was along with Sir Thomas White, they were the two people who introduced sonnet in the English society and into the English poetry. And this was perhaps most convenient, you can say, or more convenient sonnet scheme that was followed and introduced by Earl of Surrey and then of course perfected by Shakespeare. Now I'm trying to give you an example. I hope that you had followed that sonnet by John Milton, which we had put forward as an example to understand the rhyme scheme of Petrarchan sonnet. Here we have an example to understand the form and the structure of English sonnet. So here we have this minds, finds, so A and love, and now this remove is somehow differently pronounced when it comes to our present day English. So love, and it should be something like remove. So but in that sense we can say that these are marked with the same letter. And then we have mark and bark, so they are cc, and then shaken and taken dt. So this is how the English sonnet would be organized in majority cases. But again I repeat that the changes that were introduced by the English poets into the sonnet form, as they had got from Petrarch, were not necessarily in a subtractive manner. There were still poets who followed Petrarch, who idealized Petrarch as a great person or a poet who composed sonnets. So we can say that variety is coming into the sonnet form and into the content of English sonnets. Now when we talk about the themes, you I hope remember that we had referred to Petrarchan sonnet and his courtly love attitude that he would follow, and again that love theme with a hopeless lover and a cruel mistress. So this was one major identification mark of the approach of Petrarch towards sonnet. But here in English sonnets we see that many other themes were introduced. Like for example, some were self-revelatory, in which the poet would reveal his mind to the readers, and not all were necessarily concerned with the theme of love. Of course the theme of love still survived, and it was used by many poets to for writing sonnets, but there were other themes also that came into play. If you remember, in our last lecture, 29 number, we had a discussion about the contribution of Sir Philip Sidney, Spenser, and then William Shakespeare. So we leave them here and we move forward to John Donne, who was a leading metaphysical poet. So he wrote mostly religious sonnets. Like they were not all religious, but most of them were religious in tone and in meaning. So in that sense, the introduction of religion, you can say that this was another theme that was introduced by English poets in sonnets. Similarly, if you look at John Milton, he wrote political as well as religious sonnets, and of course some were having personal themes related to his own personal self, and this on his blindness is a good example of something that has religious overtones and also personal overtones. So in that sense, this was another addition, you can say another good example of addition or variations in the subject matter and themes of sonnet. So we can say that in the hands of English poets, sonnet had become open to deal with all sorts of subjects, mean religion, politics, personal self, and then of course the theme of love had always been there. If you look at the romantic poets like Wordsworth or John Keats, he also followed a variety of themes while writing their sonnets. This sonnet, "The World is Too Much with Us," is written by William Wordsworth, And in this sonnet he talks about the excesses of the world, and he talks about the way we have been spending our worldly lives. So this is again a different sort of theme. And then Keats' sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer is actually a reference to the theme of art and life, the transitoriness of life and the permanence of art, on which he has composed this sonnet. So the subject matter here is again different from the one that was followed by Petrarch. Then in the 19th century we have a good example of Elizabeth Barret Browning, who wrote a sonnet sequence, and this sequence was actually consisting of 44 sonnets, and this sequence was actually addressed to her future husband, Robert Browning, again a renowned poet in the Victorian era. So in that sense, again somehow Elizabeth Barret Browning is trying to follow Petrarch and the theme of love in his in her sonnets. Then we have this Dante Gabriel Rossetti's sonnet sequence, and the name of that sequence was The House of Life. And here the discussion surrounds physical and spiritual love. So love is having two sorts of it exists at two levels. One is the worldly love, which is called physical love, which is subject to growth and subject to decay, and then there is spiritual love, which have an existence above like our material existence, and it has consequences not only in this life but in the life hereafter. So again, this is a different sort of love that Rossetti is looking for in his sonnets. Then we have the 20th century German. He is this Rainer Maria Rilke. Now this is quite a different difficult name, and he wrote a sonnet sequence, and in English you call it Sonnets to Orpheus. And Orpheus was a legendary Greek musician. So he is actually trying to establish a connection and a relationship of art and poetry to life, and this has been achieved by his reference to this legendary figure whose name is Orpheus. So these were few examples that I have collected for you. The objective was mainly to give you a taste of how this English sonnet developed over a period of many years and then centuries. So we have somehow tried to discuss a few good poets who have earned a lot of reputation in their art of sonnet writing. There are other good poets whom we might have missed in this discussion, and of course it's difficult to cover all of them. So here I come to our lectures on sonnet and its various historical manifestations. So I hope that by following these three lectures you will now be in a position to understand and to talk about and to be confident about the basics of sonnets in their historical sense. And then of course I have also tried to be of some help to the students who are not directly related to history but are dealing with their courses in poetry, in English poetry. So here we are If you have any question or if you have any confusion, we all are here to support one another. So keep writing, keep commenting, and stay tuned. Hopefully, we are going to have our next lecture very soon. Thank you very much.